Hold on a second. I don't have the greatest light this time, but I really kind of want to do this, so we're just going to go ahead and start. I'll figure out how to be a little bit better at this game later. Better lighting, better time of day, But either way, I feel like reading a fairy tale. And I feel like reading a bunch of fairy tales. So I'm going to start reading fairy tales. And we're going to start with Hans Christian Andersen. And this book particularly is the complete Hans Christian Andersen. Of course, it's from Barnes & Noble's, I think. I don't know for sure where this was made. I'm not entirely sure it's that important. Okay, a bunch of legalese, blah, 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 blah. Random House. Aha, okay. Random House. So anyways, my aunt got a bunch of these. So we're going to read. And I'm going to read fairy tales. One a day. In the evening. And I feel like I should read the introduction to this book, because I read it a minute ago, and I feel like it's actually important. Unlike the Brothers Grimm, who collected and recorded popular tales, Hans Christian Andersen wrote his own folk tales, using story elements and images culled, to be sure, from his childhood recollections. In his native... Oh man, there's going to be words I don't know how to say. This is going to be fun. In his native Odense, Odense, Denmark. Apparently, Hans Christian Andersen was Danish, or Denmarkish, whatever that means. Forgive my ignorance. So, yeah, let's just... I'm going to skip this. There's going to be words I can't pronounce. No. Let's read this. Let's actually get through. Let's get through the introduction, shall we? Even the words I can't pronounce. Hans Christian Andersen wrote his own folk tales, using story elements and images culled, to be sure, from his childhood recollections. In his native, unrecognizable word, Denmark, I think that means hometown. His parents, grandmother, and elderly townspeople included the inmates of a lunatic asylum where his grandmother worked, regaled him with fairy tales and myth. He also borrowed themes from Danish history and foreign literature. But his stories and his fame reflect most his fertile imagination and ability to transform his own experiences into the stuff of legends. Andersen, meant to be remembered as an author of serious works, not these smottings or trifles as he called his fairy tales. But though he wrote plays, novels, poetry, travel books, and several autobiographies, most these are almost unknown outside of Denmark. His fairy tales, however, are among the most published works in all literary history. Unlike typical fairy tales, many of Andersen's do not end happily. Though Andersen eventually won wide acclaim and a measure of material comfort from his writing, the hardship he suffered and witnessed along the way were incorporated, as was all else, into his tales. Many of his fairy tales and stories are moralistic, others are strongly Christian, and yet he retained a mischievous sense that people's ethical standards are not always the highest, and that this can be treated with humor as well as moral exhortation, as in Little Klaus and Big Klaus. Some of his tales, like What One Can Invent, and The Will-o'-Wisps in Town, says the Moor Woman, express his feelings about writing and imagination. Others are futuristic, The New Century Got Us, and In 1,000 Years. One can see that Anderson was not a typical children's author, and indeed, he bridled at the suggestion. In his own time, he often read his tales for the pleasure of adult friends. During a stay with the King and Queen of Denmark, he read the king a story most evenings, often repeating the king's favorite, the nightingale, the swineherd. The poetry, the subtlety, and the humor of his stories commend them to people of any age. Most of the stories in this book were translated 19th century by Miss H.B. Powell. P-A-U-L-L. Powell, I think. We have chosen her translations wherever possible because we found it the most pleasurable readable. Miss Powell, however, did not translate all of Anderson's tales. Thus, a number of them have been collected from translations by H. Oscar Sumner, Jean Herschelt, and several unknown translators. We are pleased to have the words of 6 distinguished artists to illustrate this book. They include Alfred Walter Bayers, 1832-1909. Henry Justice Ford, 1860-1941. The popular illustrator of Andrew Lang's fairy book series, Arthur Rachman, 1867-1939, whose delightful drawings need no introduction. Hans Richter, 1803-1884. Ooh, long life. At least easy for me to math. A well-known German artist, and Hans Tenger, 1853-1932, a Dane popular for his artisan illustrations. Except for Richter and Tenger, the illustrations are all English. Bayes, Ford, and Gaskin's illustrations may be identified by initial print within the picture's borders. Rachman's are signed with his last name. There is only one Richter illustration for The Little Match Seller. Thus, by elimination, Tenger's illustrations may be recognized as those that are unsigned. Even quite young readers are probably familiar with The Ugly Duckling, The Little Mermaid, and Thumbelina, and are anxious to rediscover them. Do you know as well The Snow Queen, Auntie Toothache, on Lesbeth? With this collection of fairy tales and stories, these and many other unforgettable characters will find a permanent place in your memory. Lily Owens. Pardon me while I get some light on the subject. Let there be light. The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Far down in the forest, where the warm sun and the fresh air made a sweet resting place, grew a pretty little fir tree, and yet it was not happy. It wished so much to be tall like its companions, the pines and the firs which grew around it. The sun shone, and the soft air fluttered its leaves, and the little peasant children passed by, prattling merrily, but the fir tree heeded them not. Sometimes the children would bring large baskets of raspberries or strawberries wreathed on a straw, and seat themselves near the fir tree and say, it is not a pretty little tree, which made it feel more unhappy than Is it not a pretty little tree, which made it feel more unhappy than before? And yet all this while the tree grew a notch or a joint taller every year, for by the summer of joints in the stem of a fir tree we could discover its age. Still, as it grew, it complained, "Oh, how I wish I were as tall as the other trees. Then I would spread out my branches on every side, and my top would overlook the wide world. I should have birds building their nests on my brows, and when the wind blew, I should bow with stately dignity, like my tall companions." The tree was so discontented that it took no pleasure in the warm sunshine, the birds, or the rosy clouds that floated over it morning and evening. Sometimes in winter, when the snow lay white and glittering on the ground, a hare would come springing along and jump right over the little tree, and then how mortified it would feel. 2 winters passed, and when the third arrived, The tree had grown so tall that the hare was obligated to run around it. Yet it remained unsatisfied and would exclaim, "Oh, if I could not keep on growing tall and old." There is nothing else worth caring for in the world. In the autumn, as usual, the woodcutter came and cut down several of the tallest trees. The young fir tree, which was grown to its full height, shuddered as the noble tree fell to the earth with a crash. After the branches were lopped off, the trunks looked so slender and bare that they could scarcely be recognized. Then they were placed upon wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where were they going, and what would they become? The young fir tree wished very much to know. So in the spring, when the Shallow and the Stork came, it asked, "Do you know where those trees were taken? Did you meet them?" The swallows knew nothing, but the Stork, after a little reflection, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I do. I met several new ships when I flew from Egypt, and they had fine masts that smelt like fir. I think these must have been the trees. I assure you, they were very stately, very stately." "Oh, how I wish I were tall enough to go on the sea," said the fir tree. "What is the sea, and what does it look like?" "It would take too much time to explain," said the stork, flying quickly away. Rejoice in thy youth," said the sunbeam. "Rejoice in thy fresh growth, the young life that is in thee." And the wind kissed the tree and drew waters with its tears, but the fir tree regarded them not. Christmas time drew near, and many young trees were cut down, some even smaller and younger than the fir tree, who enjoyed neither rest nor peace with longing to leave its forest home. These young trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept their branches and were also laid on wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. "Where are they going?" asked the fir tree. "They're not taller than I am, indeed. One is much less, and why are the branches not cut off? Where are they going?" We know," said the sparrows. "We have looked into the window of the houses in the town, and we know what is done with them. They are dressed up in the most splendid manner. We have seen them standing in the middle of a warm room and adorned with all sorts of beautiful things, honey cakes, gilded apples, playthings, and many hundreds of wax tapers." "And then," asked the fir tree, trembling all its branches, "and then what happened?" "We did not see it any more," said the sparrows, "but this was enough for us. I wonder whether anything so brilliant will ever happen to me," thought the fir tree. "It would be much better than crossing the sea. I long for it almost with pain. Oh, when will Christmas be here? I am now as tall and as well grown as those which were taken last year. Oh, that I were now laid on the wagon, or standing in the warm room with all the brightness and splendor around me. Something better and more beautiful is to come after, or the trees would not be so decked out. Yes, what follows will be grander and more splendid. What can it be? I am weary with longing. I scarcely know how I feel." "Rejoice with us," said the air and the sun. "Enjoy thine own bright life in the fresh air." But the tree would not rejoice. Though it grew taller every day, and winter and summer its dark green foliage might be seen in the forest, while passers would say, "What a beautiful tree." A short time before Christmas, the discontented fir tree was the first to fall as the axe cut through the stem, and divided and pithed. The tree fell with a groan to the earth, conscious of pain and faintness, and forgetting all of its anticipations of happiness. In sorrow at leaving its home in the forest, it knew that it would never again see its dear old companions, the trees, nor the little bushes and many-colored flowers that had grown by its side, perhaps not even the birds. Neither was the journey at all pleasant. The tree first recovered self while being unpacked in the courtyard of a house with several other trees. It had heard a man say, "We only want one, and this is the prettiest." Then came two servants in a grand livery and carried the fir trees into a large and beautiful apartment. On the walls hung pictures, and near the great stove stood great china vases with lions on the lids, where there were rocking chairs, silken sofas, large tables covered with pictures, books and playthings worth a great deal of money. At least the children said so. Then the fir tree was placed in a large tub full of sand, but green baize hung all around it, so that no one could see that it was a tub. And it stood on a very handsome carpet. How the fir tree trembled! What was going to happen to him now? Some young ladies came. The servants helped them to adorn the tree. One branch they hung little bags of cut-out colored paper. Each bag was filled with sweetmeats. From other branches hung gilded apples and walnuts, as if they had grown there. And above and all around were hundreds of red, blue, and white tapers, which were fastened on the branches. Dolls exactly like real babies were placed under the green leaves. The tree had never seen such things before, and at the very top was fastened a glittering star made of tinsel. Oh, this was very beautiful. This evening, they all exclaimed, how bright it will be. Oh, that the evening were come. Though the tree and the tapers lighted, then I shall know what else is going to happen. Will the trees of the forest come to see me, I wonder? If the sparrows will peep in at the window as they fly, shall I grow faster here and keep all these ornaments summer and winter? But guessing was very little use. It made his bark ache, and this pain is as bad for a slender fir tree as headache is for us. At last the tapers were lighted, and then what a glistening blaze of light the tree presented! It trembled so with joy in all its branches that one of the candles fell among the green leaves and burnt some of them. Help, help! Exclaimed the young ladies, but there was no danger, for they quickly extinguished the fire. After this, the tree tried not to tremble at all, though the fire frightened him. He was so anxious not to hurt any of the beautiful ornaments, even while their brilliancy dazzled him. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they intended to upset the tree. They were followed more silently by their elders. For a moment, little ones stood silent with astonishment, and then they shouted for joy, till the room rang, and they danced merrily around the tree, while one present after another was taken from it. What are they doing? What will happen next? Thought the fir. At the last, candles burnt down to the branches and were put out. Then the children received permission to plunder the tree. Oh, how they rushed upon it, till the branches cracked, and had it not been fastened with the glistening star to the ceiling, it might have been thrown down. The children then danced about with their pretty toys, and no one noticed the tree, except the children's maid, who came peeping among the branches to see if an apple or fig had been forgotten. A story, cried the children, pulling a little fat man towards the tree. Now we shall be in the green shade, said the man, as he seated himself under it, and the tree will have the pleasure of hearing also, but I shall only relate one story. What shall it be? Evada or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs, but soon got up again, and the last married a princess. Evade, cried some. Humpty Dumpty, cried others, and there was a fine shouting and crying out. But the fir tree remained quite still, and thought to himself, shall I have anything to do with all this? But he had already amused them as much as they wished. Then the old man told them the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell downstairs and raised up again and married a princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, tell another, for they wanted to hear the story of Evade. But they had only had Humpty Dumpty. After this, the fir tree became quite silent and thoughtful. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet married a princess. Ah, yes, so it happens in the world, thought the fir tree. He believed it all because it was related by such a nice man. Ah, well, he thought, who knows? Perhaps I may fall down too and marry a princess. And he looked forward joyfully to the next evening, expecting to be again decked out with lights and playthings, gold and fruits. Tomorrow I will not tremble, he thought. I will enjoy all my splendor, and I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Evade. And the tree remained quiet and thoughtful all night. In the morning, the servants and the housemaids came in. Now, thought the fir, all my splendor is going to begin again. But they dragged him out of the room and up the stairs to the garret, and threw him on the floor in a dark corner, where no daylight shone, and where they left him. What does this mean? Thought the tree. What am I to do here? I can hear nothing in a place like this. He had time enough to think, for days and nights passed, and no one came near him. And when at last somebody did come, it was only to put away large boxes in the corner. So the tree was completely hidden from sight, as if it had never existed. It is winter now, thought the tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow, so that people cannot plant me. I shall be sheltered here, I dare say, until spring comes. How thoughtful and kind everybody is to me. Still I wish this place were not so dark, as well as lonely, with not even a little hare to look at. How pleasant it was out in the forest while the snow laid on the ground, when the hare would run by, yes, and jump over me too, although I did not like it then. Oh, is it terribly lonely here. Squeak, squeak, said a little mouse, creeping cautiously toward the tree. Then came another, and they both sniffed at the fir tree and crept between the branches. Oh, it's very cold, said the little mouse, or else we would be comfortable here, shouldn't we, you old fir tree? I am not old, said the fir tree. There are many who are older than I am. Where do you come from, and what do you know? Asked the mice, who were full of curiosity. Have you seen the most beautiful places in the world, and can you tell us about them? And have you been in the storerooms where cheese lie on the shelf and ham hangs from the ceiling? One can run about on tallow candles there and go in thin and come out fat. I know nothing of that place, said the fir tree, but I know the wood where the sun shines and the birds sing. And then the tree told the little mice all about its youth. They had never heard such an account of in their lives, and after they had listened to it attentively, they said, What a number of things you have seen. You must have been very happy. Happy, exclaimed the fir tree, and then as he reflected upon what he had been telling it, he said, Ah, yes, after all, those were happy days. But when he went on and related about Christmas Eve and how he had been dressed up with cakes and lights, the mice said, How happy you must have been, you old fir tree. I am not old at all, replied the tree. I only came from the forest this winter. I am now checked in my growth. What splendid stories you can relate, said the little mice. And the next night 4 other mice came with them to hear the tree had to tell, and the more he talked, the more he remembered, and then he thought to himself, Those were happy days. But they must come again. Humpty Dumpty fell down the stairs, and yet he married a princess. Perhaps I may marry a princess too. And the fir tree thought of the pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, which was to him a real beautiful princess. Who is Humpty Dumpty? Asked the little mice. And then the tree related the whole story. He could remember every single word, and the little mice were so delighted with it that they were ready to jump on top of the tree. The next night, a great many more mice made their appearance, and on Sunday 2 rats came with them. But they said it was not a pretty story at all, and the little mice were very sorry, for it made them also think less of it. Do you know only one story? Asked the rats. Only one, replied the fir tree. I heard it upon the happiest evening of my life, but I did not know I was so happy at the time. We think it's a very miserable story, said the rats. Don't you know any stories about bacon or tallow in the storeroom? No, replied the tree. Many thanks to you, then, replied the rats as they marched off. The little mice also kept away after this, and the tree sighed and said, It was very pleasant when the merry little mice sat around me and listened while I talked. Now that is all past too. However, I shall consider myself happy. However, I shall consider myself happy when someone comes to take me out of this place. But would this ever happen? Yes. One morning, people came to clear out the garret. The boxes were packed away, and the tree was pulled out of the corner and thrown roughly on the garret floor. Then the servants dragged it out upon the staircase, where daylight shone. "Now life is beginning again," said the tree, rejoicing in the sunshine and fresh air. Then it was carried downstairs and taken to the courtyard so quickly that it forgot to think of itself and could only look about. There was so much to be seen. The court was close to a garden where everything looked blooming. Fresh, fragrant roses hung over the little palings, and linden trees were in blossom, while the swallows flew here and there, crying, "Twit, twit, 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 my mate is coming." But it was not the fir tree they meant. "Now I shall live," cried the tree, joyfully spreading out its branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow, and lay in a corner amongst weeds and nettles. The star of gold paper still stuck to the top of the tree and glittered in the sunlight. In the same courtyard, two of the merry children were playing who had danced around the tree at Christmas and had been so happy. The youngest saw the gilded star and ran to pull it off the tree. "Look at what is sticking to that ugly fir tree," said the child, treading on the branches till they cracked under his boots. And the tree saw all the fresh, bright flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished it had remained in the dark corner of the garret. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, of the merry Christmas evening, and of little mice who had listened to a story of Humpty Dumpty. "Past, past," said the old tree. "Oh, had I but enjoyed myself while I could have done so, but now it's too late." Then a lad came and chopped the tree into small pieces, till a large bundle lay in a heap on the ground. The pieces were placed in the fire under the copper, and they quickly blazed up brightly, while the tree sighed so deeply that each was like a pistol shot. When the children who were at play came and seated themselves in front of the fire and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop." But at each pop, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of summer day in the forest, and of Christmas evening, and of Humpty Dumpty, the only story it had ever heard or knew how to relate, till at last it was consumed. The boys still played in the garden, and the youngest wore the golden star on his breast, with which the tree had been adorned, the happiest evening of its existence. Now all was past. The tree's life was past, and the story also, for all stories must come to an end at last. Good night.